Vou apresentar rapidamente o Abbi a ti, para tu falares um pouquinho do Abbi, portanto, és a melhor pessoa para isso. Tá bem? Introduzes o Abbi. Ok? Sim? Então, boa tarde a todos, a todas. Obrigada por estarem cá, seguindo Passa Palavra nessa quarta-feira. Hã? Ah, não é aqui comigo. É o Gaspar. Estamos aqui na Galeria Vernet, muito contentes de ter o Abbi Patrix, nosso convidado para a conversa da tarde. Vai falar com o Luís Carmelo, um grande querido amigo, grande narrador. Eu estava aqui a pensar em falar para vocês o seguinte: essas conversas que a gente tem no Passa Palavra, a ideia é que sejam conversas muito informais, abertas, relaxadas. A coisa do streaming custa um bocadinho, porque puxa um pouco para a solenidade. Mas a nossa ideia é que a gente possa estar a conversar tranquilamente, e o Luís sabe perfeitamente como fazê-lo. O Abbi Patrix é um grande narrador, tem origem francesa, norueguesa, é um dos fundadores do FESH, a Federação dos Contadores de Histórias Europeia, e é um dos grandes nomes mais antigos da narração oral europeia. Estamos muito contentes de tê-lo cá. Eu ia pedir para o Luís apresentar e falar um pouquinho do Abbi, porque é um amigo, é um parceiro de trabalho de longo tempo, e ninguém melhor do que ele para apresentar o nosso convidado da tarde. Agradecer muito à Galeria Vernet, às bibliotecas municipais, à Câmara Municipal, aos nossos parceiros, todos do festival, os parceiros mídia, nossa equipa que tem feito um trabalho maravilhoso. Continue a seguir o festival ao longo da noite e ao longo da semana, até domingo. Vamos estar com uma programação muito grande que vamos divulgando. Então, vou passar a palavra ao Luís. Muito obrigada. Obrigada, Abbi, por estar cá, por estar conosco. E obrigada, Luís, também, por ter agarrado nesse desafio da conversa.
Ora, a Cláudia, eu avisei ao Abbi que ia falar em português só no início, para apresentar um bocadinho. A Cláudia já disse praticamente o que eu tinha para dizer sobre ele, porque vou deixar também que ele fale por si, que nos conte a sua história, é a melhor maneira. Vamos fazer isto em inglês, portanto vamos passar ao inglês, para que o Abbi compreenda, e vai-vos responder, vai falar também em inglês. Eu vou falar no meu inglês pobrezinho, pronto, espero que seja suficiente, ainda bem que vai ser ele a falar mais. É um prazer enorme, finalmente, é um prazer sempre voltar aqui a Oeiras, ao Passa Palavra, e é um grande prazer ter o Abbi aqui em Oeiras. Nós já nos cruzamos em Portugal uma única vez, em Braga, também com o António e com outras pessoas, e há muitos anos que gostava de tê-lo cá e queria que aqui em Portugal se pudesse ouvir o Abbi a contar histórias. Portanto, para mim, pessoalmente, é um prazer enorme. I was just saying how it's a pleasure to have you here in Portugal. So, Claudia made a little bit of a presentation saying that you are half French, half Norwegian, that you were one of the pioneers of the storytelling in France, one of the founders of FEST, the Federation of European Storytelling. So, Abbi, I will ask you for introducing you, that you tell us a little bit of your story, how you have actor training, you study in the Lecoq School in Paris, so you are ready to be an actor, a great actor in French theater. So how did it happen? How did you end up telling stories?
So, hello. I hope it will be all right with my English. I would have loved to be able to speak Portuguese. It sounds so familiar. I understand words. But let's accept that English is our transit between your ears and my mouth tonight. We will not pretend that we speak English. We will just use English as an in-between space of conversation. And so the version of what is great when you people ask you, so of course I'm already 68, so I have been through a lot of things, and I can tell my story as I want. There will be no proof that I lie or that I say the truth. The only proof is this Luís, which is there because he made a PhD on the revival of storytelling. So he knows. So if you see him like, oh, like, that means that perhaps I'm going somewhere else than the truth. But of course, it's all the question of the truth. So there is facts that says that I have pictures of myself disguised in a clown when I was already very young. When I see my son, who's 5 today, what he's able to do at 5 years old, I think when I was 7 or 8, I was already dreaming to be a clown. And I would put makeup and I would go to neighbors and make little shows, get some money and buy candies, like you do when you're a child. But I think I was already that. And I have found, much later, a little booklet where my intention was to write jokes. So I would have my own book of jokes that I would be able to tell. I find that, and it's written with the childhood handwrite, so I was already able to write, and there are only 2 stories, 2 jokes. And after that, I guess I remembered them, or I guess I didn't feel it was, and it's funny because I have all my life done the same thing. Start a little booklet saying, now I'm going to write all the stories I can tell. 1, 2, no, it's not important. What is important is the live experience. So that must have started very young, collecting jokes. And then from that, in my childhood, that's sure, because that's the truth, my mother was a migrant from Norway to France. And as all the migrants, they take something that is very dear for them with them. And in Norway, now I discovered very lately, the story of Norwegian folklore and revival is really, Norway has been under the power of Denmark for 400 years and Sweden for 100 years. So imagine, I think perhaps you can understand what it means to be under the power of another culture or 2 other cultures for 500 years. So between Viking time and the 19th century, Norway has been locked down. So of course, when they were suddenly independent, again, the need of going back to roots, language, stories was huge. And that was the Grimm moment where the brother Grimm were collecting stories in Germany. And there's 2 men who did the same thing in Norway. They collected in all the dialects that had been hidden under the Danish language, all dialects in all the fjord. You see how Norway is. And so the Norwegian, they have a book which is nearly a Bible, which is the folk stories of Norway. And they read it aloud. They don't tell it, they read it. My mother had it, and she was at home the evening, and she would read the Bible, the Norwegian stories, to us. But there was a question. It was written in Norwegian, and we were born in France. We did not speak Norwegian. But my mother, she wanted so much to transmit something, that I think, not knowing what she was doing, she was actually telling us the story. And it was always going like this, is that she would read a little bit of the story, and then she had to stop, and then she was translating in a French that was really approximative, very poetic, full of mistakes. And that's what we heard as a. And it's funny, at the time, bilingual was not a good idea. So she was not teaching us Norwegian. So we heard this French, colored with Norwegian, stories in the original language, then translated. And I think it had very strong impact on me, because I heard that these stories always, and actually now we come to how suddenly transformed theater into storytelling. But the first story that came out from me when I was in a position, as Antonio said, the first time you suddenly become a storyteller, you don't even know what you're doing. You're just telling a story. It was a Norwegian story that I heard from my mother. But that's for the family part. That's not the reason why I became a storyteller. That's in a way, the inner movement, because we like to have inner movements. We like to be able to say, I have a tradition. My mother was telling stories. Traditional stories from Norway, something really, important. And of course, it's not at all like this, but it is also like this. There's always both things. So that's for the inner. And this is why now I'm in France. I'm perhaps the only one who's really telling Norwegian. Nobody would dare to tell Norwegian stories without asking me permission. I had a mail a month ago. Someone said, could I tell the story? It was not the Three Bukken de Bruges. It was not this one. It was another one. It's the match with the troll. Perhaps I will tell it tomorrow night. We'll see. And it's a classic. And people ask me permission. Of course, you can do what you want. Everybody can find the book. And my mother even translated the stories for me, and then we published it. So we have some stories published in French of this. So they are not mine, but it's so identified. The Norwegian storyteller, it's me. So be careful, all of you. So that's for the inner movement. Do you want to know more about something else?
No. So then what happened in the theater?
In the theater. Yes. So in my childhood, my father was a painter, but he loved theater. And as a funny thing is that after the war, the Second World War, he earned his living in the theater. In French, in classic theater, you have always a guy who has a stick of wood, and behind the curtains, he's doing to, 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 to. And then the curtain opens and the theater starts. So my father was doing that in the theater, and he earned his living doing that, and he was painting the rest of the time, but he never earned money with paintings, but he was in the theater. So he knew very well the theater by being behind the curtains. He could quote Molière, Shakespeare, Ibsen. He could quote actors. He was looking at them, and he was imitating them at home, and he loved theater. So he was going to the theater, and he brought me to the theater. And I'm born in 1953, so that means I was 16 or 15 or 16 years old when he brought me to the most extraordinary performance. It was the time of research theater, experimental theater, and in Paris came the Bread and Puppet Theater. You speak about them in your thesis? Bread and Puppet Theater?
No?
I don't think so. It was the beginning of this movement of all this American research group that came to France, to Paris. There was the Living Theater. You might have heard about this group, very famous. There was Grotowski that was coming from Eastern Europe, and there was Peter Brook that had moved from Britain to France because he thought in France it would be better for his research. So all these research groups were in Paris, and I was brought in. There was a boxing club that had transformed into a theater. So there was no walls, no theater, just a ring. We were sitting on the floor around, like half circle, and they had huge puppets, and they were telling the story of the Bible, the creation of the world, like this, and gender, and they were bringing huge puppets like this, and they were running towards the audience. So you were there, and you were facing these actors and these puppets, and you had the theater was going into your body, and that was extraordinary. And my father said, this is the theater of today. When you're going to do theater, that's what you have to do. So I went to Lecoq, because the classic schools in France were so old-fashioned, there was no way to go there. So, and then I went to Peterbrook, and I said, I want to work with you. And he said, you're too young, so go to the school. So I went to Lecoq, and I went back to him afterwards. I said, I want to work with you. He said, well, there's no part for you. And then he said, each time I asked, he said no, so I did something else. And then, but then I saw this carpet show they were doing, coming back from Africa. They had taken a classic tale, it was called Los, the Bone, which is written by Birago Diop, which is one of the great poets of West Africa. And they took the story and they performed it with a very improvisation. There was a drummer, there was a carpet, and it was a little bit like what I was saying before. It was just a carpet, actors on one side, musician there, and the audience sitting around. And they were improvising all the characters. It was just gorgeous. It was just fun and great. And I said, I want to do that. So when he said to me, no, you cannot, there's no part for you, I said, well, then I just do like you. So I bought a carpet, I bought a Volkswagen bus, and 4 actors, 2 girls, 2 men, 1 musician, 5, and we went on the road. And the first thing we said, so we have the idea, we have the carpet, we have the Volkswagen bus, what are we going to do? And they said, well, Peter Brook's company, they were telling an African stories. We could take an African story. And I said, no, we could do a Norwegian story. I have one. And I told my friends the story, and they said, yeah. So we started to perform. So we were performing folk stories, Norwegian, African. We were looking at stories, Indian, exactly like him. Carpet show, improvising characters, a few props, and music. So we've just imitated Peter Brook's company. And what's funny is that I still see some group of people doing that today. The same style, a carpet, few actors, they call it storytelling theater or whatever they want to call it. It's so basic. It's like street theater, basically. But we were telling folk tales. That's how it starts. And I like to tell, if I want an anecdote which goes with this one, is that it was the time where, of course, mobile phone, fax, all this did not exist. We had signed our first contract, and I had to go before the truck and the actors and the musician, the carpet, to sign the contract and to check where we're going to perform in a festival. It was 3 hours from Paris. So I took the train, I went there, and to make a long story short, the truck never came with the actors and the musician, the carpet. They got stuck, they had an engine problem, and they could not ring, they could not do anything, and I was waiting, and the time, it was 2 o'clock when we were supposed to perform. They were not there, I was alone, and the guy from the festival, he said to me, well, you've signed the contract. I mean, you have to do something. People were starting to come, so there was a round place. People sat down, and there was a space for a carpet, but there was no carpet. And there was a space for the music, and I was there waiting. And then the director, we waited quarter of an hour, half an hour, and then said, you must do something now. I said, but what can I do? Well, tell them what you're doing. He said, I'm sure he said, tell them what you're doing. So then I started to say, hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry, but I'm alone now in front of you, but you have to imagine what is missing. There's a carpet here there's a drum set with a musician, and we are 4 actors and actresses, and we perform a story that goes like this. So once upon a time, there was a king. And I started to, and I also imitated the actor. So the king is a very tall, he was an American Jew actor with extremely elegant, like this, with huge coat. I pretend I was him, I came in like this. And then there's a little girl, she's very small, and she's very wise. And she goes like this. So I acted all the characters alone with no props, nothing. And it lasted as long as a performance, for an hour. And at the end, everybody clap. And the guy from the festival said, and then the audience said to me, hey, it's a great trick. The truck that does not come, the thing that's missing, it's a great trick to get us into your story. Well, good show. Pop, pop, pop. Everybody left, and then the truck arrives. I must say, I thought that was really interesting to do this. So alone you can do everything that you're doing with 4 or 5 at the truck, and I was thinking like this. And we performed another time, and there we met Bruno de la Salle. Bruno de la Salle was a little older than me, and he had a dream. He was dreaming, and he was telling his dreams. And it was, after May 68, you could do whatever you wanted in Paris, in France. Everything was good, was interesting. So he was telling dreams. It was vague, but he had an instrument that was a glass instrument, and he was going into it. And then he started to tell stories also. He had an idea that storytelling could be something, but himself was a bit vague. But when he saw me with my group of actors, he said, "This is theater. We must tell stories. Don't act them." I said, what's the difference? I'm there with 5, but I can do it alone. No. Stop acting. Come with me. We're going to search what is really storytelling. And so we did. He took all my company, the people, the actors, the musician. We created another company with new other people, and we started to invent what he, in his mind, thought was storytelling. And his idea was that we had to tell epics. Because stories were, in France, people say, oh, storytelling, stories for children, So we were not taking seriously. So he said, we have to do epics because that's the only level where people will understand that it's an art form. The rest, okay, but epics. So we've done that for 7 years, I think. And after I did continue on this idea, and we had the money from Festival d'Avignon and the radio, our national radio, because it's always human stories. The guy who was leading the national radio, France Culture, which is our most intellectual and most artistic radio, he had 5 years before retirement. And he had one idea in his mind. He wanted to hear the Arthurian legend of Parsifal. He wanted people to tell Parsifal today. And so he fell on us, and he said, do it. So he said, we have to rehearse a little bit. Parsifal is really a tough thing. It's complicated. The round table, Arthur, and all that. So the Odysseus is easier. So, and Bruno de la Salle, he was obsessed by the Odysseus. So we would shrink it a little bit. We did the Odysseus for 8 hours in the Festival d'Avignon. We were 12 people, not acting, telling with musician, original music. Then we did the Arabian Nights, the Récit de Scheherazade. Again, 8 hours, 12 people, music, things like this the next year. And then, finally, we did the Arthurian epic. And that the guy from Radio France, he was really happy. And after that, he retired, and Radio France stopped to give us money to do that, because they were not interested. Festival d'Avignon, they stopped. They were not interested. But we were interested. And that was in France. We can say that these 3-4 years where we had the money from the radio and Avignon, it's like the toppest that you can have in France. We have had it for a few years, and we have initiated something, because all the storytellers and musicians that were with us, that's been working with us, has been everywhere. They are the storytellers of today. More or less, at a moment or another, we've been working with them. So it has made something of a very high level, which is epic telling with music. So that's the beginning, I would say, the very beginning.
Because then was a question that came to me now. Because then in the like the revival in France started like in the 80s, early 80s.
A
Probably.
little before, yes.
A little before.
Bruno and Henri Gougaud, and they started a little before, 2 years or something like this.
And then you had this very important conference in the 90s that were a little bit organized under with Calam that have this very big conference with storytellers from all around the world. And it seemed to me, reading the conference book, that was really a big deal. And so the revival in France was already something in the 90s, was already established.
Yeah.
And how it was, how do you, looking at it today, years after, how it was this revival in France?
I think the intelligence of Bruno at the time was that he was linked to the libraries. You know, the movement of library that came from America to L'Heure Joyeuse in Paris. You know about this. So this woman who was the head of this library, L'Heure Joyeuse in Paris, she was very interested in folk traditional tales. She was very interested in the storytelling movement. She was very active. All the librarians were interested into telling stories the Wednesday afternoon, following this movement of America. And also, we had this remarkable woman called Geneviève Calam-Griaule. She was an ethnologist. Yep. She was the daughter of one of the greatest name in anthropology in France. He's the one who went for the first time in Africa in the Dogon culture, which were completely unknown. And he collected a story called Dieu d'eau, the god of water, which is a very beautiful mythology. And his daughter was a linguist, and she had no barrier between university, revival with artists, and librarians. She wanted to gather everything. And she said to us once, I remember saying, "To see you telling stories is the best gift you could have given to someone like us who's been collecting these stories and just put them in books. And to hear you telling them, it's like the flow of life that starts again. It's beautiful. We're so happy about it." So she took the money of the Institute of Ethnology, Anthropology, and made this incredible gathering of all the people we knew around the world that had started this interest in storytelling. It happened in Paris. I think it was 89.
89?
89. L'anniversaire de la Révolution. And so there were Americans, Dutch, Holland, perhaps, I don't remember everybody who's there, but there was a lot of what became later this world movement. There was, of course, French, Germans, English, a lot of English, Americans, English. And there was this meeting and talks and trying to put together these worlds, the librarians, the scientists, and the artists, and try to make them work together. A lot of discussion, very interesting, about tradition, about the art form, and about the depth of the stories. And I remember I was very, very young storyteller at the time. Really, I'm not even sure I could have called myself a storyteller, but I was fascinated by the African stories, and I was telling with the drum a part of a fragment of stories, a story that I had found in an anthology of African. I did not understand what it was, really, as we do sometimes. We're just fascinated by something. And I was telling it with my drum, extremely energetic. And Geneviève Calam-Griaule, she was looking at me like this, facing me like that. And at the end she said, "But how did you know that story?" I said, "I find it in this anthology of African tales." And she said, "That's amazing. I could not believe that someone would dare to tell a story like this, because the woman is cutting her breast and it's very violent and it's completely symbolic." And then she started to speak about the story, about Africa, about tradition, about the images that you find in stories that you don't understand, but suddenly they appear as metaphor. And it was extraordinary. After that, I thought perhaps I will never tell that story again, because how dare can I do something like this, you know? But in naivety, we do sometimes beautiful, true gestures. And so that's this meeting. And perhaps it's what created Fest later on and makes people want to be interested that storytelling is happening everywhere in the world. And we have to be attentive to it because it's very different. There are a lot of stories, backgrounds, and differences. And it's beautiful when it's different. It's a good lesson for humanity to understand that it can be different and accept it.
Yeah, there is this one thing that I always found it curious about your work and the way you work. It's this idea of putting things together, and especially putting practice and theory, practice and research together. You always did a lot of research. You are very curious, so you go out looking for things in terms of content, but also in terms of style, ways of doing it. And so if you could tell us a little bit about this quest of research, training, your experience in La Maison du Comte, with the Labo.
I think when we were telling these epics with Bruno at the time, we wanted to see if there was still in the world an example of a living tradition of epic tellers. And we thought there was nothing. We had looked, we had tried in Africa and look, and then one day someone said to us, you know, I know a cook in an African restaurant, when the meal is over, he's actually taking a little instrument, a small balafon, and he's telling stories which are really quite incredible, you know, some kind of epic, but fragments. So with Bruno, we went to the restaurant, we had dinner, and then we hoped he would come. And he came, and he was telling, it's not, you know Sunjata, the African epic, which is one of the most famous Sunjata, and the King Lion. Anyway, it was one of these African epic, and he had a little balafon, small like this, that he was putting on him with a belt like this. So he had his two things. And he was telling and singing in the same time. And very soon, when you drum and you sing, your body starts to move. So very soon, he was starting to dance. And he was not nearly getting in trance. And we knew the story. So we could recognize the fragment of story. We had read it as an epic from Africa, but we had never heard someone telling it. And he was so lively, so extraordinary. And I just couldn't believe it. We heard him. We invited him in where we worked, and he said, "I did not know it would interest anyone. I live as a cook, but I have heard this in my childhood, and I've seen people doing that. So I just continue what I remember. And when I saw his technique, that he was able to sing, play, dance, speak to us. It was also very interactive. I thought, but, you know, I was already perhaps at the time 27 or 28 years old. I say, I have already lost 20 years. Because this guy, to be able to do what he was doing, it was a childhood practice. Because it was so organic. You could see his feet, his hands, his head, his voice, his body, his mental. Everything was completely organic. We were like this, and then Bruno and me started to be obsessed by this thing, so we started to make exercise, to step, to try to do it, you know. And then I became obsessed by this thing about how am I going to go towards an art form where I have not been educated as a child, where I have not been organically transmitted. How can I do that? And that's how I started to search. So at this moment, Bruno and myself, we separated. And because I wanted to use theater, I wanted to use the stage. He did not want to. But it's also because actually he was much older than me already. So for him, I think it was a bit too late to try to do this physical thing. And, it was difficult physically. But I could still do a few things. So I worked a lot on these things. Dissociation between feet, hands, head, mental working while you do something, moving at the same time, using music, being two, being three, sharing speech, all kind of things that we're experimenting. And of course, I could not do that alone. I had to have a group. And that way it comes with theater, is that in the theater, you don't think alone, you think as a group, as a company. So I created a new company. I said, we need a company. And I've tried with a lot of different projects to work with different storytellers, musicians, and I could see that the main question was the transmission of this research. I see, because I think I was looking at a lot of different things that I wanted to share and experiment, and I thought that it's the young people who will be able to do it. So at this moment, I was invited to La Maison du Conte, who was just this new house that had been dedicated to storytelling. It was in 2000. And straight away, I created a research group with young storytellers. That was about 15, 20. And we worked for 3 years, every month, 3 days. And I brought subject of research, inviting singers, inviting dancers, inviting writers, tellers. If I had known Luís at the time, I would have bring him so that he could give his ideas on stories. I was, all kind of people were coming and having this group to work together. And I remember this sentence I had found, that is, you only transmit well what you are searching. So I've been searching, and I had 4, 5, 6 groups for 3 years of sometimes even 20 storytellers that came every month, and we were working, trying things. And some said to me, it was really difficult, Some people, they are not very good at doing 3 things together, but I was always giving exercise and group work, things, and forget about this. This is why I don't like at all the image that the storyteller is a lonely soul in his solitude. No, he's not. He cannot be. Not only he cannot be alone, but he is at a place where he gathers all stories, or people, or a community, or a group. He's not alone. It's not a right image to use. I think the storyteller can be the center of an energy, of a group energy, a community, a group, but he's not a lonely soul. That would be so pompous to think that you're a lonely soul and just by yourself you would be something. You're nothing. If you don't have a group of people listening, if you don't have the stories that other people have been telling for such a long time, you would be nothing. So so I love this idea of group of people working together, searching together, and sometimes one is alone, but your link. And this is why I've been always, pushing, and I had also a European group, international groups, and for a long time. Now I have a child of 5 years old. It takes all my energy.
Not true. Not true, because the training, the transmission it continued. Yes. And we'll talk about this later. But you have your drum there, and you already talk about music and the way it's. If you understood, for him, storytelling is very connected to music. You talk about rhythm and body, but it's for me, it's always quite impressive. One of the first shows that I saw from Abbi was this one, Pas de deux, that I was privileged to see it in Paris, live with Linda, and I already saw Le Compagnon also, the Grateful Dead, his version of the Grateful Dead, a lot of music also. And it's also about, for me, it's not only rhythm, but also music, prosody, the work of the voice, of singing, not singing. I always was amazed by, is he singing already? Is he talking, reciting what he's doing? So, if you want, this will be a great opportunity to give us a taste of rhythm, melody, music, story.
As I mentioned before, I could tell a little bit of this African story that I spoke about, that this African myth, or I don't know, it's a mystery, and I'll try to do it in English a little bit, and perhaps I'll swap French-English, because for the prosody it's interesting. So it's based on nothing special. I have a text which is badly written. It's kind of collected by a monk, perhaps, or a priest in West Africa. So there are few information, but the images are striking. So I just worked by myself with this, and so it goes like this.
Yeah.
Okay. Bagarijam, 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 bagarijam. Bagarijam, bagarijam, bagarijam. Les gens d'Asbon amenèrent un cheval. Ils désirent le vendre, mais la vente est difficile, car le propriétaire du cheval dit « Mon cheval, je ne le vends pas pour de l'argent. Mon cheval, je le vends pour des mamelles de femmes. » Bagari, bagarijam, 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 bagarijam. The people from Asbon, they come to the market. They want to sell their horse. They say, my horse, I don't sell it for money. I sell it for the breast of a woman. Bagarijam, 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 des gens viennent, people come. How much money for that horse? No money for that horse. Just give us the breast of a woman and the horse will be yours. People say, your horse is a very, very high price. Who could pay the breast of a woman? Here comes a boy. He knows that whatever he asks, his mother would give it to him. How much money for that horse? No money for that horse? Give us the breast of your mother and the horse will be yours. The boys say, good. He comes back to his mother. Mother, buy me that horse for your breasts. The mother says, yes. She takes a knife. She cuts her breast. She gives it to the boy. The boy gives it to the seller. And then he has the horse. Bagarijam, bagari, 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 bagarijam. Oh. The boy says to the horse, horse, I bought you for the breast of my mother. Bring me to the end of the world. The horse says, jump on my back. Here we go. And off he went with a horse to the end of the world. And of course, a lot of things will happen in his story. So in the world tracks that we have of epic telling, there's always music, more or less. Chanting, trance, drum, whatever, the Greek harp, lyre, whatever instruments you have, the various tradition, there is always this, and it's physical. It's because the epic needs a level of involvement of the body, and for that you need the rhythm, you need the voice, and then you can drum or not drum, whatever, use the body. But it's like you raise the level in your body of energy, and this is like trance. These marvelous tellers who are in that after the Russian had stopped all the traditions in Russia. Of course, when USSR fell down, all the tradition came out, and there was this in Kazakhstan these tellers they are sitting like this, cross-legged, and and they chant and they chant and they chant verses. All that they chant, they sing, they move, and as an audience, after a while, the only way to really be with them is to do the same. And you are in trance, and you hear the story of this guy who's going with his horse to the other world. He goes under, and you can see that this trance comes from the teller, given to the audience. You cannot just sit and listen like this. This does not work. You don't get the energy of what is behind. So I think this is why I say, as we had no official outside tracks, we had to search and find ideas to how to be epic tellers today, and there's a lot of way to do it. And it's I love it. I just love music and think it's natural.
What's a good example, right? Foi bom exemplo, right?
Uh-huh.
I was asking if it was a good example.
Was it? Yes?
Yeah. You can see him tomorrow. You see in the program tomorrow. This is a great story to open our last theme. That will be. It's a good story because we have been working, me, Abbi, in training young storytellers around Europe, and we have the privilege of making this pilot course in the Berlin University. That was really originated in the will of Ragnhild Morch from Berlin University. That was called "What Are You Talking About?" and was a course that would supposed to propose to young storytellers to look inside their repertoires, the story they were telling, and see what problematic issues there was in their own stories about racism, gender, heteronormativity, all these questions that we feel that young storytellers are a little bit resistant towards folktales, because they found that folktales are filled with prejudices, bias, all these problematic issues that we are dealing and are urgent today. And so we did this course. Abbi and I, we participated, and it was quite revealing for me and for Abbi too, I know, because we share about it. And so how do you see today, Abbi, after this an entire life trying to revive folk tales, trying to get people to enjoy, especially magic tales, especially wonder tales, getting people to get involved and to enjoy it. And today now, as a white male, a French-Norwegian, half French-Norwegian, dealing with all these problems that I know that you're dealing with intimately now, that the stories that you tell have all these problematic images. What do you think about it, all this question? I don't know if it was clear, the question I did in my poor English.
No, I think with Luís, we have shared a shock. Although I thought I was prepared to this shock, but actually you're never really prepared. That's why it's a shock. It's because otherwise it would not be a shock. And it makes us think to something really important, is that the collecting stories, the time of collecting stories is already very ancient. So all the tellers, if they had stayed alive with the folk tales, the stories and the tellers would have evolved with the world. They would not have tried to keep something out of the world, because the storyteller is in the world. The stories are in the world. They are not to go sideways. And the stories would have evolved with the society, with a relationship between, for example, children and parents, male and women. It would have evolved, but it has not. So we are confronted. So the first movement for me was absolutely love with wonder tales, magic tales. This was my favorite stories, most beautiful. Of course, epic, but epic was really for groups and shows and things. But in my daily life as a storyteller, I love to tell marvel tales, magic tales. In French, it's called merveilleux. The word is beautiful in French. It's merveilleux. And there was never so much problems for me to tell these stories. I just loved them, and I wanted to reintroduce them in the society, because they were put sideways for children, or deformed, or Disney and all these. We know what stories has become, changed and all that. I wanted to reintroduce these stories, and at the time I had no idea that that would be a problem. There was no problem. I was just so sure about these stories, so beautiful, so mysterious, so extraordinary, but I was only telling stories of male hero. It never occurred to me that I would tell something else. There was always, it's the story of a man, or it's the story of a boy, or it's the story. And little by little, with the movement that you might know, especially women here, I've started to be a little bit questioned. Sometimes there was women coming out and saying to me, it's nice, your story. I mean, we can see you're a storyteller, it's great, but we as women, in your stories, it's not always really good. And why don't you tell stories with women heroine? I don't know. See, I mean, you're a woman, you're a storyteller, do it. It's you. You can do it. I cannot do it. I'm a man, I'm telling male story. And they were saying, we're not sure. And the way the women are portrayed in your story sometimes a bit. And one of my major story, there's a woman which is whipped by the hero, and for me it's completely symbolic. But suddenly after the years, it was not symbolic at all anymore. The audience were taking it from the front. This man is whipping the girl in the story. And I started to have, like Ragnhild, this German storyteller, students of her addressed me directly after the performance saying, you cannot tell that. This is finished. You cannot tell stories where a man is whipping a woman. I said, but this is second level. This is symbolic. He's freeing her from the troll. Say, no, we don't want to hear this, the symbolic images. You're whipping a woman. You cannot do that in a story. And it was like, our story, I say, it's all right. And then Ragnhild asked me, I can see you're troubled by this question in your story. I said, yes, it troubles me very much. Well, then come and we'll make this workshop with Luís, and we'll speak about this question. Stereotype, gender questions, racism in stories. And then we discovered, I don't want to speak for you, but we discovered our position, which was addressed by Ragnhild, that says, you are old, male, white, European, you're in position of power, and you are telling stories of men on power on women. It does not work. You have to stop that. You have to look at things differently. And so I was very, very shocked. I said, this is true. I can feel it's true. There's something true. I don't know what, but I can see I have to do something. So we discussed a lot with Luís, the two of us, although he's much younger than me. But he also had this thing that you don't actually really have a clear vision of what is coming out from you when you are telling a story. You don't really get everything. So you need this feedback. And then I started to look at young storytellers, and I noticed that they did not want to tell these Marvel tales I loved. So I was saying, why? Too much issues in the stories, too much problems of relationship, of stereotype, of, and we don't get into this double level, this symbolic thing. We don't like that. We don't do it. I said, but if you don't tell Marvel tale, if you don't tell this tale, they will disappear. And it's beautiful material. They say, yeah, but we don't get it. So I'll say, okay, then we have to work on it. And we started in my first labo before this group to say, so what's the problems? Where are they? How can we address it? How can we change things? And so with Ragnhild and this German guy, we started to point and say, we have to help the young storytellers to face these questions, but we have to help them to find solutions because we want the story to be told. Okay, what does it mean? It means they have to be changed, these stories. You have to change things. Not everything, not just for fun, but you have to look at problems in the story and you have to do the work so that the problem is transformed into something which is transmittable. And it's a lot of work. And it's bloody hell difficult sometimes. There's resistance of the material because the material is a few centuries old. It resists. So you have to find, so we've started, and of course, with the knowledge of Luís, with all the variation of stories, you find ideas. And I could see once, I remember the Scottish young storytellers, she said to me, but Abbi, I would like to tell that story, this Scottish epic, but this is not possible today to say the story. So I said, but change it then, but tell it. And she said, well, but the old storytellers in Scotland, they said to me, I shouldn't touch anything because that's a tradition. I said, send them to hell. Listen to me. Change it. And she did. She was incredible, this Scottish girl. And then she did it. She took away the part that was problematic. She found solution, but she did it. And then suddenly she was standing on the Zoom because it was all virtual, on the Zoom there. She was telling her story. Was beautiful. I said, well, Luís, great. You've done a great job. It's working. They will change the world, the young storytellers. They will really change the world. They will address things. They will face it. And they will not throw it into the garbage. They will work so that it's possible to tell these stories because they are beautiful and they are eternal. We have to listen to these stories. They are great. So that's what we've been doing. And so now it's the end of is it finished, more or less?
Yes, more or less finishing, yes.
So to finish that thing, I have a little private conversation with Luís afterwards. He does not know yet. But I said then, I have to do something myself now. I have to get myself involved. So I will do, and I'm in France. When you are when you are 12 years old, that's for your daughter. You enter into the second level, le collège, and you have stories, mythology, the Odysseus, and the folk tales at the program of when you are 12 and 13. So you have it in the program. It's great, in a way. Depends how you address it. And I was thinking, but these poor children, they hear to the Homer's Odysseus. I'm sure they don't really get the whole picture. The only thing they get is that it's a male who's going to one woman after another instead of going home while his wife is waiting with the tapestry and having all these violent men trying to rape her. Is that the image? That's very simplified, but they get simplified ideas. So I said, I'm not going to say that the Odysseus should not be told because I was the first one to do it, so it would be a bit, But then, is there an Odysseus where a woman is the heroine? No, it does not exist. I said, well, I'll do one. I'll create a story which is going to be an Odysseus of a woman, and she will escape from her condition, so she will be Norwegian. Now I start to give him a little hint of what he's going to be concerned by. She will start in the Lofoten Island, in the northern part of Norway, And she would travel with fishing boats, and she will go on the path of the cod, because the cod has a long history of Vikings. This is why I'm sure they went into Madeira and Azores and everywhere. But what is sure is that they came to Portugal. That's for sure, because they brought the cod, because you have one of the best recipes in the world of salted cod. And so they came here. And so I will orally write a story about this. So she's called Ella, and she will go from North Norway to Senegal, going through Portugal. But I don't know exactly what will happen in Portugal. So I will speak with Luís. Perhaps you'll know one day. Perhaps I'll come, and I will do it with the percussionist that Luís presented, Linda Eicher, which is a great musician, and she will work with a very basic computer system using only sound objects and transform it into sound effect. And so we'll have a very small, like this little stereo setting, and we'll make an epic style, but with a woman Odyssey. It's called l'Odyssée d'Ella. Mm-hmm. That's the target for my future retirement of storyteller. I will tell the Odyssée d'Ella the rest of my life. Okay. That's it. Voila.
So thank you, Abbi. Thank you very much. I will wrap it up in Portuguese.
Please.
Muito obrigado. Acho que está na hora de terminar. Foi um prazer estar convosco, os nossos ouvidos. Foi um prazer estar com o Abbi. Eu vou agradecê-lo muito ao longo da noite agora e depois. Obrigado à organização, Cláudio, António, Cristina e a todos os outros da equipa do Passa a Palavra por esta oportunidade de poder estar aqui a conversar com ele mais um bocadinho. Muito obrigado. Boa noite. Thank you, Abbi.